Welcome to week number 3, where we will start talking about e-business and electronic business value. In 1937, Edward Land started a company that made polarizing plastic and named it Polaroid. The business boomed. Land was taking his family pictures on his vacation in 1943 when his 3-year-old daughter asked why they had to wait so long to see the developed photographs. Land was struck with the idea of combining the polarization technology with developing film. By 1950, Land had a camera that produced black and white images, and by 1963, he released a camera that produced colored pictures. The Polaroid camera took off, and by the late 1960s, it was estimated that 15% of American households owned one. Now, the question would be, if Polaroid executives had used Porter's 5 forces analysis, would they have discovered the threat of substitute products such as the digital camera? And granted, that would be looking way ahead in the future to see what technology could possibly be. But even still, if going back to the 1860s, when they were taking 10 type photographs, and those rude elementary ways that they did it, they would have never imagined the picture spitting out in black and white or even in color as it once did for Polaroid. So trying to see in the crystal ball what technology might hold in the future is really an impossible task. Now, we say that to set the stage for this is what we're going to look at in this upcoming chapter. Web 1.0 e-business. We're going to talk about disruptive technology, and certainly the Polaroid camera qualifies as a disruptive technology. We're going to talk about the 4 e-business models, e-business tools for connecting and communicating, the challenges of e-business. In section 3.2, we'll talk about Web 2.0 and conclude with Web 3.0. So let's go ahead and start talking about e-business. The first term that we are introduced with, and here they're picturing the 2 threats and the 2 potential substitutes. On the left you have the original Polaroid, and on the right you have your digital camera. So here it introduces the term digital Darwinism, which implies that the organizations which cannot adapt to the new demands placed on them for surviving in the information age are doomed to extinction. So the question is, did the Polaroid camera, since they're using it here in this example, was it a victim of digital Darwinism? Was it doomed to extinction, or did it evolve? Did evolution take place? So, in order to answer these questions, we have to answer a little bit more about what is disruptive technology. And when we're talking about disruptive technology, certainly the notion of sustaining technology comes into play as well. Disruptive technology is a new way of doing things that initially does not meet the needs of existing customers. So, for example, a need or want for a customer may be to take a cruise to, Mexico, we'll say. Well, the steamboat was a new way of transportation. Is that now a way of getting existing customers to Mexico? The answer would be no. So that would have been a disruptive technology. Sustaining technologies tend to provide us with better, faster, and cheaper products in established markets. So a sustaining product in place of the steamboat would be one of the cruise lines that are in operation now, either Royal Caribbean or Carnival. Disruptive technologies redefine the competitive playing fields for their respective markets. Disruptive technologies tend to open new markets and destroy old ones. Disruptive technologies typically cut into the low end of the marketplace and eventually evolve to displace high-end competitors and their reigning technologies. In other words, disruptive technologies come in and they cause a disruption. Sustaining technologies virtually never lead in markets opened by new and disruptive technologies. Here's a chart laying out disruptive versus sustaining technology. Dell, the figure displays the top 4 and bottom 4 companies. The figure displays companies that are expecting future growth to occur from new investments or disruptive technologies, and companies that are expecting future growth to occur from existing investments. So along the x-axis, you have expected returns on existing investments, and the further to the right you go, towards 100, you have General Motors and Phillips Petroleum. Notice that the expected returns on new investments is very low, but expected returns on existing investments is very high. That's sustaining. As you go up to Dell, they have an 80 when it comes to expected returns on new investments, but they only have less than 20 when it comes to returns on existing investments. They are disruptive. When we're talking about disruptive versus sustaining technologies, a term that comes to mind is called an innovator's dilemma. This is how established companies can take advantage of disruptive technologies without hindering existing relationships with customers, partners, and stakeholders. So in other words, the innovator's dilemma, they come up with an idea for a disruptive technology. It's great, it's going to have high returns for the company, it's going to look great, but what's the impact going to be on these shareholders? Basically, all of these groupings are considered shareholders. The customers, what's the impact going to be when that disruptive technology hits the market for them? Are they going to be displaced because the disruptive technology replaces the product that they depend on and that they are brand or product loyal to? Is that going to cause an issue there? Partners, kind of the same thing. Is the disruptive technology going to cause me to have to look at other suppliers? And is that going to cause issues and disrupt those relationships with people like other suppliers? And then the stakeholders. Well, there's the risk there. If your stakeholders are by nature avoid risk, well, bringing a disruptive technology to the table is certainly going to force them to embrace risk. And you might lose investors as a result of that. So we come up to one of the biggest forces that have changed, or that has changed and is still changing the nature of business today, and that's the internet. Now, at the core, the internet is simply a whole bunch of computers that are networked together, and it's to the place where it's networked worldwide. As a result of this is forcing organizations to have to change how they're identifying their target markets. Because now no longer is the target market limited to the community, ever how big you define community. It could be town, it could be state, it could be region, it could be the United States or a nation as the community, ever how you define community. it's opened up those borders, and it's caused organizations to have to redefine and look at what they're considering target markets, because their competitors are definitely doing that. As a result of that, they're also having to adapt and adjust to economic environments. Well, if they have identified that their competitors are gaining market share by going into lesser developed countries, and those countries can afford the competitor's product, well, what's my organization going to have to do in order to remain competitive and go into those markets as well? And then the last part of transformation for organizations is the changes in technology. And again, it comes down to what's your competitors doing, and are you making the change before they make the change? Because after all, you need to be the leader in the market instead of always the reactive follower. The internet, the ultimate disruptor, says by focusing on the unexpected allows an organization to capitalize on the opportunity for new business growth from a disruptive technology. In other words, it's providing a new way of doing old things. And in doing that, you're able to capitalize into new markets and branch out and become bigger than what you once were. The internet began as an emergency military communications system operated by the Defense Department. Gradually, the internet moved from a military pipeline to communications tools for scientists to businesses. One definition, and I don't see it introduced, so I need to insert it here. We gave the definition for internet. Well, I thought we did. I'm sorry for making you have to view me scrolling through this. The internet is a computer network that passes information from one computer to another using common computer protocols. A protocol are standards that specify the format of data as well as the rules to be followed during transmission. In other words, it's how are we going to get the data from point A to point B. And anyone that's looking to transmit data, well, they have the standards or they have the protocol in order to make that happen. Moving ahead, some other terms that come up. www on all of the web addresses that you type in when you're surfing the internet, and probably the web addresses you're typing in as you're letting this video play in the background, so you can say that you've played the video while you're entertaining yourself with something a little bit more entertaining than me gabbing on and on and on about this stuff. The 3 W's, World Wide Web, is what they stand for. That provides access to internet information through documents including text, graphics, audio, and video files that use special formatting language called HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Users are able to retrieve, and I know that I am really dumbing this down, but regardless, the web browser allows you to view the data created by the HTML Hypertext Markup Language coding. The Hypertext Transport Protocol, the Internet Protocol web browsers use to request and display web pages using the URL, which is a Universal Resource Locator. Now, as a side note here, you may or you may not know about this, But when you're transmitting data, and everyone gets kind of nervous about putting personal information out on websites and putting in secure, identifications, things like your social security number for security purposes, they kind of get iffy, and justifiably so. But one way to know if your website is truly safeguarded, or if it's not, if it's open for general attacks, basically, is the letters at the beginning, the HTTP. If it just says HTTP followed by the www whatever your URL is, that's not a secured website. But if it says HTTPS, that S denotes that that website is a secured website, and it is safe to be, in theory, it is safe for you to put your information in and it be protected. Now, as a little side rabbit trail on this thing, the internet has provided everyone a voice. And it has provided those voices to be heard and seen worldwide. And so for that, and I'll be posting, there's a link that's in your resources for this week for the 13 most embarrassing web moments. Now, I'm not going to read each and every one of these, and I know you're thankful, but I do want to just do a few, just to break up the monotony a little bit. Coming in at number 13, it's labeled, He'll Huff and He'll Huff and He'll... It's a story put out by the Smoking Gun, pretty much dedicates itself to showing people during their most humiliating moments. But the celebrity mugshot of James Brown, Nick Nolte, and Yasmin Bleeth have nothing on poor Patrick Tribbett, who was nabbed for abusing harmful intoxicants, namely huffing gold spray paint. You should really Google him so you can see his picture. It's a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I will spare you the 1,000 words on it, other than it's classic. Coming in at number 12, putting as much of American online as possible. When AOL posted the search records of 658,000 subscribers, the names were redacted and placed with a unique number, so some privacy was maintained. The company couldn't even fall back on the "it was an accident" excuse. The release was intentional, part of a horribly misguided research project to give academics a data set to see what people were searching for online. Talking about needing to search through big data. They certainly did provide that. Turns out folks were looking at the usual stuff: American Idol, Britney Spears, cheap plane tickets, and a whole lot of porn. AOL removed the data, but only after it had been well mirrored, searched, and reported on. The company apologies fell on deaf ears. AOL is currently being sued over the matter. This article, when it was written, it was current on November 17th in 2006. I'm sure that has been resolved. Let's see if we can find a couple more. The case of the wrong guy, coming in at number 6. It was an honest mistake. The BBC, seeking to interview a technology expert in the Apple computer versus the Beatles Apple Corps dispute, booked Guy Cuny to appear on the air. But someone goofed and instead brought one Guy Goma to the set. His stunned look when a reporter started asking him questions is something you just can't fake. Goma, originally reported to be a cab driver, actually turned out to be at the studio for a job interview. He later said that he had thought the whole thing was some kind of an initiation stunt. The BBC has since been vigilant about forcing online video sites to remove the embarrassing footage. Now, that's a remarkable statement because, folks, once it goes online, it does not go away. Do not put something online if you do not want other people to see it. Coming in at number 3, I scream, you scream, we all scream for Howard Dean. No one can be sure whether Howard Dean's 2004 presidential campaign speech completely killed his chances of winning the Democratic nomination. He had just finished third in the Iowa caucus. But the infamous Dean scream has become a political cautionary lesson as infamous as Michael Dukakis's Snoopy appearance in 1988. Dean gave a passionate speech reeling off the states he would soon conquer, and then, overcompensating for the crowd noise, he punctuated the affair with a yell that was part rodeo call, part slasher movie sound effect, and part yodel. A sheepish Dean dropped out of the race days later after the episode received heavy TV airplay. It's now a remix staple. Don't miss Dean Sane, The Brain. Dean Sane in The Brain. And again, I've seen the video. It's kind of comical. I'll post it for your pleasure so you don't have to search too hard for it. Last, coming in at number 1, the Steve Ballmer, CEO of Microsoft, will stop at nothing to keep the legions of Microsoft employees motivated and entertained, even at his own expense. It must have been this spirit that prompted Ballmer to take the stage during a 2001 company event to the tune of Gloria Estefan's Get on Your Feet, performing what was quickly dubbed the Monkey Boy Dance. Part Skip to Malou and part Nazi Goose Step, Ballmer danced while screaming at his minions. A few days later, an unrepentant and sweat-drenched Ballmer would lead a crowd to repeatedly chant, "Developers, developers." Video remixes of both performances abound. So, if you get bored during listening this lecture, you can certainly entertain yourself a little bit more by going out to the www, putting in the appropriate URL, and finding those little tidbits of entertainment. Some of the ways that industry has changed. Let's see, I am off cue somewhere. Okay, I'm sorry. My apologies. I will learn to drive this thing better. That and my notes. Okay, so reasons for growth of the WWW. Microcomputer revolution. People, little grannies sitting in their kitchen making little birthday cards for their little grandchildren and nieces and nephews, started using the computer a lot more. The whole, the world is flat, everyone's going to start using it more, becoming more independent. So, the microcomputer revolution. Advancements in networking. Computers are able to communicate quicker between each other. The World Wide Web grew. Now, I remember when the internet was first introduced to society, we had to use a dial-up. We plugged our phone line into it. We called up a phone number that connected us to a server that then connected us to the internet. It was deathly slow, really painfully slow. But now you have DSL, you have fiber optics, and all of the other communication options, and it's a lot faster, and there's a lot more that can be done, and the internet can be utilized for other things. Easy browser software simply makes it more and more easier to get online. Speed, convenience, and low cost of email. And then web pages, easy to create and flexible. It's to the point now where anyone without any type of experience can sit down and create a web page. Now, Web 1.0, the catalyst for e-business. What sparked e-business and what made it become so prominent as it is now? Well, you have travel. Travel sites such as Expedia are now the biggest leisure travel agency with higher profit margins than even American Express. 13% of traditional travel agencies closed in 2002 because of their inability to compete with online travel. I would say that would be disruptive. Entertainment. The music industry has kept Napster and others from operating, but 35 billion annual online downloads are wrecking the traditional music business. Since 2000, music unit sales are down 20%. Electronics, using the internet to link suppliers and customers. Dell dictates industry profits in that arena. Dell, as we will talk about when we talk about supply chain, was a forerunner in using the internet and e-business and connecting the consumer with their product. Financial services. Nearly every public e-finance company left makes money with online mortgage service lending. They make money through the online mortgage service LendingTree. LendingTree has grown over 70% in previous years. Retail. Less than 5% of retail sales occur online. eBay is on track this year to become one of the nation's top 15 retailers. By this year, we were probably talking about, when these slides were created, around 2010. Automobiles and education and training. Well, obviously, education, e-business is reshaping the form of education simply because I am sitting here in an empty classroom talking to myself, looking at the monitor and my lecture notes, and talking to an audience that I'm trying to captivate. All as a result of online learning and education through the internet and e-business. Thought I would share a moment of my reality to even break up my monotony just a little bit. All right, moving ahead. Web 1.0 is a term to refer to the World Wide Web during its first few years of operation, primarily between 1991 and 2003. Don't sweat dates too much as we go through this. Use those for points of interest, because I don't remember any questions in any of the tests I've ever given on this involving dates. And if it now happens to show up on your test, I apologize now. E-commerce, buying and selling of goods and services over the internet. And e-business is conducting e-commerce over the internet. Make sure you understand the difference between those. Here, advantages include expanding global reach, opening new markets, reducing cost, improving operations, and improving effectiveness. I think those are kind of self-explanatory there. The Internet's impact on information has had a global reach. Well, we know it's had a global reach because Thomas Friedman reminded us that the world is flat, and we had flatteners, and the Internet was part of, the web browser was part of the flatteners, right? I told you every unit that's going to keep recycling. Here, the impact on information has made it easy to compile, meaning easy to pull together. Increased richness. Well, instead of having one source of information, I can now have multiple, so I can see multiple points of view. If you remember from last week, for executive information systems, on the dashboards, having multiple points of view was called slice and dice. See how it all nicely ties back together? Then last, the internet's impact on information is improved content. So again, you have a more vast availability of subject matter experts to weigh in on a topic and to help it to be more accurate. Naturally, like we said before, the internet and e-business has allowed the opening of new markets. And a lot of the stuff that we'll talk about, and really until we hit week 4 and start talking about ethics, it's going to sound a lot of marketing to it. It's just the nature of the beast. Here, e-business allows for mass customization, which is the ability of an organization to tailor its products and services to the customer's specifications, such as come to my website, create a profile, and you can now customize the look of my website. That's a very minor example, but that is one. Personalization occurs when a company knows enough about a customer's likes and dislikes that it can fashion offers more likely to appeal to that customer or to that person. Yep, sounds a whole lot like pop-ups, pop-up banners, pop-up ads, anything to put something in front of you that they have determined you have shown interest in. Now, in reducing cost, they look at the long tail, which refers to the tail of a typical sales curve. Here, at the head of the sales curve, you may find things such as the top 40 music productions, the top 40 movies, brand name apparel, top-selling books, things like that, the top echelon. At the back end, or the long part of the tail, excuse me, you may find music from indie bands, things that are not as popular, irregular-sized clothes and shoes, such as that you can find at outlet stores, and books on specific topics. Things that are not going to generate as many sales on the back end, and things that are going to generate more sales and revenue on the top at the head. Now, in reducing cost, a concept called an intermediary comes into play, which are agents, software, or businesses that provide a trading infrastructure to bring buyers and sellers together. With an intermediary, terms such as disintermediation, re-intermediation, and cyber-mediation come into play. Disintermediation occurs when a business sells directly to the customer online and cuts out the intermediary, such as you buying something from someone on eBay or Craigslist. It is you and it's the seller. Re-intermediation are steps are added to the value chain as new players find ways to add value to the business process. In other words, it's the intermediaries trying to add value to what they're doing so they can keep their job and paycheck. Cyber mediation refers to the creation of new kinds of intermediaries that simply could not have existed before the advent of e-business. So again, by the mere mention of the word cyber, it flattens the world, opens us up to other resources that didn't exist before. Now here is the process of disintermediation. And I love this example every time we go over it because Dale is such a wonderful, wonderful example of this. Here at the top, we have IBM. Now, at the onset of personal computers becoming popular and being used in homes like they were in the late 80s, even more so in the early 90s. The early 90s, it really picked up steam. IBM manufactured the computer. They then had a distributor to distribute the computers to the retailers. So the manufacturer would find distributors, and they would make sales to the distributors. Now, once the distributors made the purchase from the manufacturer was paid, their hands are out of the process. The distributor then has to find retailers to carry the product. Then the retailers, of course, find the consumers to consume the product. So you can see in the middle, IBM had many steps there to get to the consumer. Well, along comes Dell. Dell says, if IBM can make these computers, we can make these computers. And so they made computers. Dell said, we would like to keep the chunk of money, of profit, that the distributors make. Maybe we can start distributing this ourselves. So Dell started doing the shipping from their facility to the retailers, primarily Walmart. Then Walmart, of course, would sell it to the consumer. Now notice how the customer price for IBM for a PC would range somewhere around $1,200. Well, Dell was able to trim some of that off, making their product a little bit more affordable, a lot more attractive, and they were able to sell it for $1,000 and still make a sizable profit. Well, along comes that disrupting technology called the Internet. Dell said, you know, why don't we try to embrace this notion of e-business? Why don't we, instead of having to require the customer to go to the stores and buy a predetermined computer system, why don't we let them buy it off of our website? And so they created a website. They allowed customers to be able to sign into the website. They did something revolutionary. They allowed the consumers to say, you know, we can only afford a $700 system. And so Dell said, okay, well, start picking the components that you would like. And so they would basically allow the consumer to build the computer themselves and specify exactly what they want. So if the consumer needed a little bit more memory, but they could compromise on the quality of video a little bit, then they could put in a cheaper video card. And that would help negate that price and keep the price with, where the consumer was happy with. And so then Dell, under this new entity called Dell Direct, meaning that it's directly from Dell to the consumer, they started connecting directly to the consumers through this. Eventually, the impact that it had on IBM is that it shut down their personal computer division. There were many other players in the market at the time when IBM was at the top. There was a company whose logo was a cow print, the black and white cow print, called Gateway. They were able to run with Dell and compete with Dell for a little bit, but again, when Dell came on the scene, Gateway could not compete, and they went into oblivion. Even now, the competitors in the market has still shifted, and I don't know that you would see as many actual Dell computers sitting around as you might Lenovo or something like that. But even still, for someone like Lenovo, they are still coming in second in terms of Dell, because Dell was the forerunners in how computers are now being bought and sold. I don't remember where this is, but somewhere Dell comes back up again as a topic of conversation along the lines of insourcing. I do know, it's in a future chapter, I'm sorry. We use Dell a couple of places in here, and they get used again. This whole concept here of Dell and their Dell Direct using the website comes back up in a later chapter when we start talking about insourcing and outsourcing and things like that. I'm sorry. No, we did talk about insourcing. We talked about it as being a disruptor, and we did talk about Dell and FedEx. That's what I was trying to remember, but I didn't want to bring it up now in case it was a future topic, but it was a past. I am so sorry. As a side note, it has been a long day. This is about the 5th class I have taught today. Let's see. Moving ahead. Improving effectiveness. So, websites allow companies to be able to improve how they're doing business. They do this through a concept called clickstream or clickstream data. All kinds of data is collected anytime you go online, period. But predominantly here, it's talking about how many times you look at a certain page on a website. The patterns of websites you visit when you go online. How long do you stay on a website? The date and times you visit. The number of customers with shopping carts. And number of abandoned shopping carts. So this type of information, for you, the business owner, for collecting it, you can see where and how your consumers are traveling through your website. That's equivalent to marketing strategies where they watch and see how people walk through the actual retail store. Because you want to position your product and services in the high traffic areas. You want to put your lesser selling items in the lesser traveled areas because it's just how you generate sales. The same concept applies here online. You want to see what web pages that they're visiting, how long they're staying on the certain websites, because it would be those web pages that you're going to give the most attention to and have the most information there to try to secure the sales of your products and services. Now, those last 2 bullet points going in hand with that, it's good to track how many shopping cart customers have shopping carts. That tells you how many people are actually interested in buying your product. The abandoned shopping carts, and doing data analysis on this, tells you who started shopping but for whatever reason they changed their mind. Now, if you could tie the data from an abandoned shopping cart back to a user profile, well, then you can have your marketing department to do a little bit of legwork to see if they can talk to those customers to find out why they didn't go through with the purchase. And that becomes a big market analysis tool and data for your marketing department to be able to evaluate. And talking about marketing and evaluating marketing, here for marketing and sales, to generate revenue on the internet, there's several tactics. First, there's the banner ad. Those are boxes that run across the web page that contain advertisements. As you visit websites, the websites collect information about you that we just talked about here. And as they do, they're going to customize these banner ads to match your online personality. So that way you'll be more apt to click the banners. Now, when you click the banners and go to one of their affiliates, they get paid for every time they have someone to click the banner from their website. So that it's not a lot of money, but it does generate revenue for them. The same with pop-up ads, but instead of being placed at the top of the web page, the pop-up ad does just that. It pops up in the middle of your screen, causing you to have to close it or interact with it in order to get back to the content you were wanting to view. The associate or affiliate program are businesses that generate commissions or royalties from these pop-up ads or banner ads. So I may have signed up as an affiliate with Reebok, and anytime that you click on my Reebok banner, they pay me. It's basically like I'm renting billboard space online to that company to advertise for them. That's the concept there. Viral marketing is a technique that induces websites or users to pass on a marketing message. You all know what going viral means, and you know what marketing, or you have some concept of what marketing is, so put the two together and you have viral marketing. Some of the metrics, since we talked about KPIs, some more of the metrics that can be measured, and it's certainly not an inclusive list. There's a lot more that you can collect and analyze in this. Visitor metrics, how many people come, what countries they come from, regions, all of that type of stuff about your visitors. Exposure is just that. How much exposure are you getting on the World Wide Web? Where do you place in search engines? And how easy it is to find your website by doing searches. Visit metrics, we just talked about what pages are visited, how long they stay on the page, and all of that. And then hit metrics, simply how many times has your website shown up in a website search. E-business models. Now, when we go through part 2, this model is going to evolve a little bit more. So right now it's an infant, and then it's going to get bigger. You need to know these for testing purposes. And the easiest way to learn it is through the chart. You have business to business, which the acronym is B2B. You have B2C, which is from business to the consumer. You have consumer to the business, and then you have consumer to consumer. These e-business models are plans that detail how a company creates, delivers, and generates revenue on the internet. Is your business selling directly to another business? Is your business selling directly to the consumer? Is the consumer doing business directly with another business? Or is the consumer interacting directly to the consumer? Now, looking at this a little bit more, in a little bit more detail, business to business applies to businesses buying from and selling to each other. Business to consumer applies to a business that sells its products or services to a consumer over the internet. Consumer to business applies to any consumer that sells a product or service to a business. And then consumer to consumer applies to sites primarily offering goods and services to assist consumers interacting with each other over the internet, such as Craigslist and eBay. A business-to-business example could be any electronic marketplace, such as a Google search marketing. A business-to-consumer would be something like Progressive Insurance, Carfax, Best Buy, or Amazon. Consumer-to-business could again be eBay or Amazon. And I think those are fairly self-explanatory. Here is just different ways that a business-to-consumer business model can happen. You have a brick and mortar. You have what's a click and mortar. That's both online and a retail store, such as Best Buy. We'll use them as an example. You can shop Best Buy online, and you can also go to their physical store. And then you have totally virtual business, which they call pure play, such as eBay. That would be an example of that. E-business forms and revenue-generating strategies. Common e-business forms, content providers, infomediaries, online marketplaces, portals, service providers, transaction brokers. I don't think that there's much for you to worry about on that. These definitions you do need to be able to recognize and apply to what you're doing. A search engine such as Google or Bing are website software that find other pages based on keyword matching similar to keyword matching, such as Google. Search engine ranking evaluates variables that search engines use to determine where the URL appears on the list of search results. One of the big variables in that is the number of visits that you have to your website. The more visits, the higher up the list it will go. SEO, search engine optimization, combines art along with science to determine how to make URLs more attractive to search engines, resulting in higher search engine ranking. There are people who do that part and focus on that part professionally, but for the amateur, for the novice, Google has a lot of tools that specialize and focus on search engine optimization to help you better position your website, which hopefully would be a business that you're trying to generate revenue. Ways to generate revenue on a website include advertising fees, like we talked about with the banners and the pop-ups, licensing fees, subscription fees, such as Angie's List, transaction fees, online banking, or Scottrade for conducting business on Scottrade, buying and selling stock, and value-added service fees. There's also pay-per-click, pay-per-call, and pay-per-conversion. Here are tools that are used for connecting and communicating over the internet. You have email, which I'm not going to go into explaining what these are, because I think in today's society and in today's day and age that we're well familiar with what they are. Email, instant messaging, podcasting, video conferencing, web conferencing, content management systems. Challenges of e-business include identifying limited market segments. It becomes a little bit more challenging to identify exactly who and what your target market is. And obviously, if you don't know who you're marketing to, it's kind of hard to customize that message. Managing consumer trust. Naturally, over the internet, there's no way to put a face to the website. And when a consumer cannot see who they're talking to or working with, the trust tends to go down a little bit. Ensuring consumer protection. And again, that goes back to managing consumer trust. If you can't see them and work with them, then you don't know that you're going to be able to be protected. And adhering to taxation rules. That is hard to enforce. So that brings us to a close for 3.1. Make sure that you're reviewing over this. Make sure you're contributing to the discussion board and all of those little things, and don't wait to the last minute to write those entrepreneurial challenges. As you're writing your entrepreneurial challenges, make sure that you are looking back at previous comments and adjusting your writing styles according to those comments. I'm